on both sides there will be question, why did you go for war? If the Americans, give up their demand for 0% enrichment, or if the Iranians, come down from 3.67 to 0%. So what you are looking at is again a very explosive situation. And the only way out is negotiation, which begs the question, why did you have to go through this war?
So for the Israeli administration right now, this was an opportunity. And genuinely, I just think they just took it. The fact that President Trump sidelined his own intelligence apparatus and went more with the Israeli information on, yes, they may make 9 nuclear bombs, which is the number the Israelis gave. And he got sold to that idea and mobilized against it.
Now straight into possibly the topic that has concerned all of us. We live, I said, at a politically precarious time, certainly at a geopolitically precarious time, because just in the last 2 months, we've seen India and Pakistan brought to the brink of war. We've seen Israel and Gaza being played out over a couple of years. Russia and Ukraine is played out over almost 3 years now. And just last week, we saw Israel attack Iran, America attack Iran, Iran do a kind of light and sound show over Qatar. And again, the sheer precariousness of the global order was brought home to all of us. We are living at a time where diplomacy, global structures, the old institutions, all seem to be coming apart at the seams, and it's a new global order up for grabs. We have the most powerful president of the most powerful democracy, the most militarily strong country in the world, talking about his decisions on social media without the Congress or many of his colleagues even knowing about it. It's done on the run, and we are living in a new, fluid, chaotic, tempestuous world. So to decode the entire quagmire in the Middle East, what its implications are for India, both economically and politically, and for the world in general, because we're all interconnected, we have a fantastic panel coming up. Ambassador D.P. Srivastava was the ambassador in Iran. He also was the ambassador when we signed, and he played a big role in India's Chaudhury port agreement with Iran. We have Kabir Taneja, who's the deputy director at the Observer Research Foundation and an expert on the Middle East. And both of them will have a very interesting range of perspectives on what this entire conflict, how close it came, what its implications are, and what it means for all of us. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming them on stage. Thanks, Kabir. I know many of you have a midnight hour here. There's the Cinderella hour, but do stay. This promises to be a really important and interesting session. I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Srivastava. You were in Iran, you've served there, you understand that nation and its society. First of all, I'd just like to ask you a pointed question. That, the world is divided right now on Israel and America's actions on dropping unilaterally without, in the midst of negotiation, to drop bombs on Iran to take out their nuclear facility. Do you think that this was an important action that has made the world a safer place, or has it blown up all the certitudes about global institutions and agreements and frameworks?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. If you let me take you back to the first Gulf War, 92. The military outcome was decided very quickly, but the political stabilization eluded that country. The same thing was repeated a decade later in 2002, when a Republican president this time tried to, well, the first time also there was a Republican president, this was a son. And the son tried to make up for whatever the Republican base regarded as the unfinished agenda.
Can everyone hear him at the back? Yeah. Sure.
And there started the second Gulf War, and again the military outcome was quickly decided. But this time, Iraq was plunged into greater chaos, and there followed a decade-long war which drained American treasury and an increasing tally in terms of lost lives. The third example, Libya, same thing. Military outcomes can be forced and produce quick results, but political stability is not so easy to achieve. And these three examples eventually went against the American influence in the area. America has more or less withdrawn from Iraq. It maintains some military bases, but it has...
I know you're giving these as cautionary tales, but can I bring you to the immediate, about your assessment of this, that, by giving these examples, are you saying that you don't think that this was a wise move?
Yes, that is part of the reason. The other thing is that this is again an unfinished agenda for both the sides. There was a quick feeling in America that, initially there was a MAGA base was divided. And the quick outcome has resulted in a sort of relief. Even the Democrats were sort of, won over. But now the questioning has started whether the enriched uranium stockpile has been destroyed. It's still there. And they realize it can't move forward without negotiations. And it's the same thing on the other side of the divide, that they have Iranians, they had requested 3.67% enrichment, which is allowed under NPT, which was part of the deal, Obama deal. Now, they cannot go back to 0% enrichment. On both sides, there will be question, why did you go for war? If the Americans, give up their demand for 0% enrichment, or if the Iranians, come down from 3.67 to 0%. So what you are looking at is again a very explosive situation. And the only way out is negotiation, which begs the question, why did you have to go through this war, which has, torn almost all the international, the international regime or order, as you say. Incidentally, that order was gone even earlier, Ukraine war. And essentially, the order is based on United Nations, which is a product of the Second World War. And if the peak five are divided, it is paralyzed.
Right. So I'm going to come back to probe this more. Kabir, I just want to bring you into it. Just to first lay the field and to understand where you all are positioned for the audience to understand, what are your own assessments of it? Do you, one, think that it is unparalleled for America, for all its history of geopolitical interventions, to do this in the midst of negotiation, to unilaterally drop 14 GOPs on another sovereign nation, And do you think many people feel that, yes, it has secured, it's made the world a safer place because the nuclear program at whatever level has been set back? What is your take on it?
First of all, thanks so much for the invitation. We are in a very sort of crucial time, as you said, on this conflict as well. Look, just to begin with, I think it's very important to understand what the nuclear dynamics in the region are, right? Why is US so peeved with the idea, or Israel is so peeved with the idea that Iran should not get a bomb? And I think we have to start with just knowing the fact that Israel is a non-declared nuclear power itself.
Yes.
Right, so there's already a prevailing power dynamic in the region. So there technically is a nuclear power in the region. Now, how power equations go, any nuclear power would not like to see a counter come up, right? And more so, a country that has been calling for the elimination of the other country for a couple of decades now, right? So they see in their own mind, they see this as an existential threat. Now, that's the Israeli perspective to it. But more than that, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very adamant on acting upon it. So he has been pushing the US to understand that what Israeli intelligence has been saying or has been providing information that, you know, it is not just about enrichment, that the Iranians are going to make a nuclear weapon. Now, from the Iranian point of view, they have said, like, look, in 2003, 2004, the Iranian Ayatollah Khamenei released a fatwa saying that we don't want nuclear weapons. Now, in Iranian mind, that's all it takes, right? If it's coming from the ideological anchoring that we don't want a nuclear weapon, that means it's a sealed deal. But that's something you can't market in Israel. So there's been a lot of sort of this gray area working of how to deal with the Iranian nuclear program. We saw the JCPOA was signed in 2015 when the Obama administration was there. That was not a bad deal at all. It was largely sort of pushed towards handling the nuclear issue only. But, you know, President Trump, even back then, was very, very against that idea. And he found commonalities of being against that idea with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So we are seeing a culmination of those two agendas festering for over the years and finally sort of acting out now, where, in my opinion, whatever Prime Minister Netanyahu whispered into President Trump's ear about Iran's nuclear program, President Trump decided to act on it for the first time. Because if you go back to his first term, you know, there have been sort of reports where he said, you know, I called back the F-15s, they were almost near Iran and we had almost targeted the nuclear facility. So this is something that has been in his crosshairs for a while. So for the Israeli administration right now, this was an opportunity. And genuinely, I just think they just took it. You know, the fact that President Trump sidelined his own intelligence apparatus and went more with the Israeli information on, yes, they may make 9 nuclear bombs, which is the number the Israelis gave. And he got sold to that idea and mobilized against it.
Right, so I know that in geopolitics there's not supposed to be any morality framework, but I'm interested that, you know, neither Russia nor China, now of course with the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia and the Arab nations have become quite close to Israel. But the fact that Israel itself has had a covert nuclear program, and way back in the 60s, you know, I mean, the Americans themselves were taken by surprise about it. So how come that Israel gets to stay out of not only the NPT and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but that they're not even part of the global discourse? How has that phenomenon come about, you know? And even at this point, no one's really called that out.
I mean, people have called that out. It's not like it's not being discussed.
Yeah, there's been a UN resolution.
Yeah, I mean, but look, they have, that's the sort of solidification of the special relationship they have with Americans, right? The US...
No, I get it that America has that relationship with them, but how come all the adversaries of...
I mean, look, on the one of the ways that they were hoping to sort of deal with this problem in the region of the question of nuclearization was the JCPOA, right? The P5+1 countries, including China and Russia, when they were negotiating a deal out of this, and they did sign it. It did come up. I think what most people, including maybe folks in Beijing and Moscow, did not factor in that President Trump will come and actually tear it apart unilaterally, right? And that has a psychological sort of moment both in Israel and in Iran. So. But you know, directly sort of challenging the notion that that Israel is a nuclear power, but it has not tested. I think that's the main sort of division that has happened right now. It's supposed to have tested. There is sort of some data that happened in the Pacific Ocean at some point in the 50s or the 60s, But just the fact that that Israeli security is so intertwined with American interests and American security gives them a lot of leverage to get away with stuff.
Right. So, Ambassador, before we begin to untangle all the threads in this, my biggest question to you is that, do you think, yes, it's an unfinished agenda, but do you think that it has been good to dismantle the nuclear program one way or the other? We don't know whether the uranium's enriched or not, but they have definitely set back their facilities. So that's the core question I was trying to get at, that for the time being, is it safer that they did this, or do you think that this is actually going to accelerate and the conflicts in the region?
On the contrary, the Israeli and the American strike has strengthened those groups or stands of opinion within Iran, which wanted the country to go nuclear. And it's also a demonstration to other countries. If Iran had a nuclear bomb, there would have been no strike. So this has actually given a blow to the non-proliferation regime. And the irony is that there was a lower cost option available. And that lower cost option, which was actually operational, was a JCPOA, where Iran had agreed to roll back its nuclear program. And it was not Iran which breached that agreement, it was US which breached that agreement under President Trump in his first term. And IAEA, as well as EU members who were part of JCPOA, that is France, Germany, and UK, have all confirmed that Iran was in compliance with its obligations. So the departure, and Iran remained in compliance for another 1 year till 2019. So why, give up something which is, there's an American phrase, don't fix which ain't broken. And they tried to do it. Now, coming back to the current situation, when the negotiations resumed between Iran and US a few months back, at one point, Witkoff, President Trump's envoy, he reported that, both sides reported they were very close to an agreement. And he had to go back on what he had reported next day, because that understanding was based on the benchmark of 3.67% enrichment, which is allowed under NPT and which was the basis for the JCPOA. And he had to go back on it, and he said it has to be...
Just for the audience who may not be familiar with what JCPOA stands for, is the Iran deal.
Is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was the name of the nuclear deal, which was agreed between Iran and the 5 permanent members plus Germany in 2016 under Obama administration, which had allowed a certain measure of enrichment which is permissible under NPT. So this was the same threshold which was agreed between Witkoff and Arakchi. This is a couple of months back, and next day Witkoff had to announce that it has to be President Trump's deal, which is 0% enrichment. So America again moved the goalpost. And the result is that created a situation which was, I think, exploited by Mr. Netanyahu in launching the strike, which is what he was always advocating.
I'm going to move on quickly, but I just want to ask one more, that both of you, as people who've been watching global affairs and analyzing it, is it unparalleled, this kind of action in the midst of a declared negotiation, for America to do this and for Israel? One, is it unparalleled? And two, who's in control? Do you really think that Trump intended to do this, or did Netanyahu force his hand? And there's a sense now that Israel is really out of American control. They're playing their own game altogether. And like we said already, the NATO, the UN, the NPT, all the structures that have somewhat kept the world in place all seem to be illegitimized, So Do you think it is an unprecedented moment, and do you think Israel is now outside of American control?
Look, just beginning with the second question first, I don't think Israel can ever afford to go outside American control. I think Israel's security is based around American power and support coming from the American polity and from the American military. So if we just go very quickly to what happened when the missiles were exchanged, even with Iran.
But just to press that
Yeah.
point, so, Trump saying, what the fuck are they doing and stuff
Yeah.
like that,
No, but
does that not show that he's
it
not
does,
entirely
it does,
in
but I
control?
think he's also the first president who said that very publicly on a public platform, sort of turned the key on Israel as well. And look, Israel knows this, like he's erratic and he takes decisions on the fly, as you were saying. Even Israel knows that, but there are some fundamental factors of American foreign policy that are very difficult to dismantle, and Israel is one of them, right? Now, the crisis point for Israel is that, look, ultimately, even Iranian missiles for the first time did land and damage Israel this time, right? So after October 7, 2023, when the attack by Hamas happened, and now, so there have been two recent actions where the idea of Israel, which is it's the most secure country on the planet, was damaged, was really, really damaged. So since 2023, they've been trying to rebuild that, and Iran somehow has still managed to puncture that again, right? Now people say, well, they have the best missiles defense systems. Iron Dome is something we keep talking about in India for some reason, I'm not particularly sure why. But ultimately the weapons that can stop, let's say, Iranian missiles coming in are American made. They're the THAAD systems, they're the Arrow systems, and so on and so forth. So they do rely on that stream coming in. So yes, the US has that key that if it turns it around, the Israelis will have to sort of get their act together according to the whims and fancies of Washington, D.C. And we saw just a trailer of that when President Trump said that, get your planes back. I ordered them their planes back. And I'm not sure how true that entire drama saga was, but if he did sort of push Netanyahu to do that, he would have to do it, right? And ultimately, look, coming back to your first question, which attaches to this one, why did the US do it, right? First and foremost, if you go back to President Trump, even pre-presidency, the pre-first term, he's had this thing about targeting Iran and its nuclear facilities, that Iran should not go nuclear. So it's a long-standing thing that he's had, right? We always think, oh, he keeps on saying things, but he's not going to do it. He does a lot of things that he says, right? That's the problem. And this is the same thing. So what the Israelis were very clever about, especially Prime Minister Netanyahu, how he strategized this was, look, I will clean out the airspace, right? I will send my fighters, I will put them on the line to clean out the airspace. The weapons that are needed to take out the nuclear facilities, the 14,000 kilogram precision guided ammunition, only the US has. They know this, right? The Israelis know that. So they said, look, we are already fighting a 7-front war, which is something that they have declared. So Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iran's other influence zones. We are already doing that. We will clear the airspace out according to our intelligence, and they have a lot of intelligence inside Iran as well. And you do give the final blow, which is what they did. So ultimately, when they cleared the airspace out, they installed domination over Iranian skies. The risk factor for the Americans was very low, right? The jets came in and the stealth bombers, they bombed the 3 facilities because there was no air defenses, and they flew back. It was a complete success for Trump, simultaneously giving what Netanyahu also wanted. So both things happened together.
Right. So, again, before I come back to Ambassador Srivastava, this whole demonization of Iran, as being the pariah state, the axis of evil, now it's become the axis of resistance. But for the longest time, there's been this rhetoric that this is the center of evil. One, I want your assessment of that. How fair, how rogue. Of course, Khamenei is awful for his own citizens. But on the global stage, has Iran done anything that actually deserves that reputation more than Israel or America, is one question. And number 2 is that in the recent past, even with the Israel attack even when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated, or when the Hezbollah were being attacked by Israel, or in the Houthis, it's not that Iran has been disproportionate in any of its actions on the global stage, So it may be, as I said, one has no love lost for Khamenei and what he's doing to his own citizens. But on the global stage, they've literally been putting on sound and light shows, these missiles that are not achieving anything. So one, is that reputation justified? And 2, has it been shown that Iran actually has not got much military strength?
Well, they clearly, I mean, one thing that was really, really glaringly obvious, they don't have much military strength, conventionally at least, right? There was no air defense, there were no aircrafts that they could launch against the incoming enemy, so there was a lot of problems that they had. Whatever little air defense they had, the Israelis took out with relative ease. But you know, look, with the US, the issue with the Iranians go back to the 79 revolution, right? They displaced a very pro-West Shah Pahlavi, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came at that time. And since then, the rhetoric from the Iranians have been that, you know, Israel and the US are the core enemies. You know, that is something that, that has been sort of ingrained into the Iranian polity, at least right at the top. Not the people necessarily, but at least the policy right at the top. But over the past 10 years, right, when we're talking about axis of resistance, which is axis of,
It began as axis of evil, now they call
axis
them
of
the
evil, sorry,
axis of resistance.
Too many axes roaming around. But axis of evil was an early 2000s term, right? For various different reasons at that point of time. I think even if you go to some of the historical context, it was very randomly peppered into the conversation by President Bush. But over the last 10 years, you know, the idea that how many proxies they had been supporting, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Iraq, and how successful that was becoming slowly. It was gnawing away territories out and getting closer to, let's say, the borders of Israel. Hezbollah was becoming fairly, you know, well attained militarily. Hamas was already in Gaza. The Houthis were nothing till like 10 years ago. There was a ragtag organization sharing one Kalashnikov with 4 fighters. Suddenly they have missiles, suddenly they have drones, and so on and so forth. So they were sort of creating this ecosystem that not just the Israelis or the Americans, but even the Arabs were very, very angsty about, right? So, for example, right now that the nuclear facilities have been bombed, I don't presume there were many tears across Arab capitals, right? Because Iran is seen sort of as a competitor, if nothing else, ideologically specifically, right? So if Iran was going to get a bomb, that would have been a kind of a domino effect at some level. So, you know, it's very difficult to sort of, you know, ultimately see, okay, how does the US-Iran equation sort of go now? As the ambassador was saying, you know, the JCPOA was the opportune moment to sort of precede the entire issue a little bit at least and come to a political resolution on the nuclear issue. Right. That would have given, that would have made you know, a platform of where a better understanding of both the sides could have taken place for other issues. One of the biggest concerns of the JCPOA was that it only deals with the nuclear issue and does not deal with the proxies and other issues that other countries are doing.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, you know, as a layperson and as a journalist, this easy language where you say the Iranian proxies are evil, but the fact that America can have the Taliban as a proxy or pretty much set up the ISIS, or, you know, that they have set up proxies wherever their geopolitical interests have played, and that's not considered an axis of evil. But the Iranians are. And, you know, at a time, as the ambassador said, when they have actually been agreeing to the non-proliferation treaties and all of that, I was wondering if, you know, you had a different take on it. But let me come to you, Ambassador, to say, one, again on this question, because so much of this geopolitical, you know, the legitimacy of bombing another sovereign nation the way America did or Israel did, comes out of the delegitimization of them by saying they're evil, you know. So I did want your assessment of that, because at the same time you're seeing Israel eviscerate Gaza, and not much is being done about that, you know, but they are not called evil outright. So one, as a diplomat, having served in Iran, what is your assessment of Iran? You know, that is it more evil than other states? And number two, how do you assess India's reaction to this entire conflict, you know? How have we played the cards? I know that Prime Minister Modi called, you know, Pezeshkian and then asked for a de-escalation. But there wasn't a similar call to Netanyahu asking him to de-escalate. So what's your assessment of how India is playing this?
Let me, before I answer these two questions, let me make two quick comments about what was discussed earlier. Whether Israel is deciding America's policy. And I think you're absolutely right. And this is not the first time which has happened. Way back in the 90s, the first question was, whether Israel is deciding America's policy, and I think you're right. Way back in the 90s, President Clinton, after his visit to Israel, when he boarded Air Force One, he asked his advisors, I'm sorry to use that term, he asked his advisors, who the fuck is the superpower here? So what President Clinton was referring to was that he had just been dictated to by the junior partner, and which is same thing which has happened, which was happening with Biden. With Trump, it was expected to be different. Now, the second point I want to make, and I don't have a clear answer. I think the historians will have to look into it. I don't think it was premeditated on the part of the US. President Trump keeps changing his decisions, and if you look at his record in the first term, 2019, Iranians shot down an American high-tech RQ-9 or something drone. No reaction. There was an attack on Abqaiq and Khurais, two major oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. No American reaction. And President Trump said, no American life was lost. So that must have sent a shiver down the spine of the Arabs, that their chief protector is saying that as long as my boys are not killed or my property is not damaged, why should I fight for these fellows? So he was very cautious, and he removed Bolton after Bolton moved the Sixth Fleet, and after I think 2019 built up. So he was cautious, and the same caution he displayed before the elections. In September, he made a statement that war will be very costly. And the same statement was repeated by a vice president, who was a candidate at that time. So something has changed. Now, coming back to your question whether Iran can be considered an evil state or something, let me put it very categorically. Being a professional diplomat, I don't like this, moral terms. I'm not saying diplomacy has to be immoral, but the fact is that Iran is a status quo country. And if you look at Iran's map, it has kept shrinking in past 3 centuries. And where do I pick up this insight? Before I went as Indian ambassador to Iran, I remember one of the US Congressional Research Report. It uses the term that look at their borders. They lost Azerbaijan, they lost Bahrain, they kept shrinking. So it's a status quo power. After 9/11, Iran actually cooperated with the US and gave US access over Iranian airspace. And there was a sense of hurt in Iran that they were immediately rewarded with this term being part of the axis of evil. So I think that's a completely unfair characterization of that country. But there's a background, and I think that animosity goes back to a very unfortunate decision, and for which Iran bears responsibility, that is 1979 hostage crisis. So that lives on in the American psyche. Now, your last question was about the Indian position.
Just when you were going back to the history, and Kabir, I'll bring you in there also, is that didn't it begin also with America doing a regime change? When I think it's Mohammad Mossadegh, he nationalized the oil assets of Iran, and it was an American oil company, I think it was BP.
It's British,
yeah. British, that was going to lose the oil assets. And so they created a regime change and brought in the Shah of Iran, So, I mean, that cycle of intervention and American selfish interests plays out endlessly across the global stage, So,
I mean, yeah, that happens. That clearly, if 79 is in the psyche, so is that is also in the psyche of the Iranian people, right? And the Iranian sort of system. But look, at that time, there was one superpower in the world, and it was behaving like a superpower. It mobilized its power for good and for bad we can get into the nitty-gritties of how moral or ethical it was, or how much did they lose and how much did they win. But the fact was that because it was the only superpower in the world, it had that authority and sort of drive, for a lack of better term, to try and mold the world how it wanted to do it. Because there was no one else sort of pushing back at that point of time, right? Now we have come to a different situation where, there are other powers.
So I'm going to come back to the question I asked you about India, but because you brought this point up, again, the big debate across the world is what is the nature of the global order now? There was a big discussion, like the last, I would say 5, 6 years, maybe 10 years, there's been a sense that this is now a multipolar world where there are many voices, there are many centers of power. Does that still hold good, or has America again shown its dominance, that it can break all international rules, it can attack a sovereign nation, and everybody has to stand by and watch, So is it back to being a unipolar world, or is it still a multipolar world?
I think what we are looking right now is definitely a US that is taking a few steps back. It does not want to be the police of the world anymore, which was a self-crowned title it gave itself over the past few decades. But what is going to happen right now, we are talking about multipolarity, for example, when the US exits a lot of theaters, there are going to be vacuums. The question is going to be who fills up those vacuums, or who has the power or the political mileage to fill up those vacuums. So, when we're talking about multipolarity, which is a very common term in Delhi, for example, I see the world going more towards bipolarity first. Right, it is going to be a US-China world for the foreseeable future when it comes to at least economic power. And as far as military power goes, US is unchallenged at this point of time. I think 40 to 50% of the global military capacities are based around one country, right? So that is not going to change anytime soon as far as military power is concerned.
So I'm going to come back to China and Russia because that's very germane, but let's come back to India. What do you assess about how India is playing this new minefield world of geopolitics, and how, particularly because we have economic relations, important ones, with Iran, in terms of our energy and, many other sort of economic relationships, but also militarily now with Israel. How do you think we played this? Did India play it right, according to you?
Apart from Iran and Israel, we also have very major economic stakes in the Arab world, which is very much part of this equation. And in fact, our biggest stakes are in the Arab world. In terms of, you look at the oil imports, roughly 40% of India's oil imports come from the Gulf countries. We have a 7 million strong Indian diaspora there. With Iran, currently we have stopped buying oil. During my term, which coincided with the first round of sanctions, we continued to purchase oil, and we had worked out a rupee payment arrangement which, according to Finance Ministry's RBI's figures, saved India 1,27,000 crores in foreign exchange over 4 years. I had some role to play in working this out. Apart from this, we got Chabahar and INSTC, so we have very major interests on both sides of the Gulf. With Israel, the relationship is relatively new, though we were we were one of the earliest countries to recognize Israel, but there was a long hiatus when we didn't have diplomatic relations. We have to bear in mind in deciding our policy. And I think my comments have made it very clear what my views are.
No, it's not clear yet. Do you think India did this right? Are we squaring our T's in all directions and then ending up squaring none? Or is it that, I use this phrase very often now because it's something that Mr. Raghavan said. He said that India now doesn't have, and India has joint JVs with nations. It's very transactional, it's to our interest, and that's where we stop. So there's no sort of ideological, moral, philosophical framework to the foreign policy. So in that sense, do you think India played this particular conflict right or inadequately?
Let me say there's no ideology, there's no morality in international relations. And let me illustrate
That still
it.
doesn't tell me what you think.
No, let me illustrate the point. The Russians, they condemned. They have not provided air defenses. The Israelis had taken out Iranian air defense a year ago in October 2024. There was enough time, I'm sure Iranians must have asked. The Chinese, they have condemned. They did nothing. Russians, at least, they are busy, they are tied up with Ukraine. Chinese have no such, headache. But they still didn't come forward because they had much bigger stakes on the other side of the Gulf and in Arab countries, quite apart from whatever and they have even bigger equation with America. They are trying to work out the tariff deal. So they don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
So what it brings out is basically there's no ideology and there's no morality. Now looking at it, you're asking me about Indian government's position. I told you my position, which is, very strongly in support of Iran.
Wow.
The government.
This is the first time I understood that. It is in support of Iran, yes.
I have said it in all my speeches. Now, I also have great sympathy with Israel. Its need for security has to be answered. It cannot be, this phrase from Jordan to the sea. You cannot have the ambivalence which Arabs have displayed not condemning the 7th October attack. So there's a deep sense of insecurity which has to be looked at.
But they're not doing anything about Gaza as well, So the fact that that's just playing out in front of everyone's eyes and no one is doing anything, it makes you wonder what has happened to the,
So you have actually three different things. You have to reconcile Israel's need for security or sense of insecurity with Palestinian right of self-determination, and the third element of this equation is Israel-Iran relations. And actually the third one should have been the easiest because there's no material conflict of interest. They are about 800 or 900 kilometers apart. So it's simply the perception which has changed. And those perceptions have also changed. Under Shah, Iran used to say that Iranians and the Israelis are two people surrounded by a sea of Arabs. So he was pointing out to a common interest. And that somehow changed after, the Iranian Revolution and so on. So I think these three strands have to be
So like a
brought
good
together.
diplomat, by referring to what Russia has done, you're saying that India has not done badly. It's also sort of played its own interests as it should.
I will not be able to judge that because when the governments decide, they also have to take into account other factors like reciprocity. So, that is also an angle which you have to bear in mind, that who sided with whom, and we have had, Pahalgam is just one incident. There is a whole history behind it.
Yeah, but on Pahalgam, America didn't really side with India.
I know. And that brings me to if you permit me, it's one angle which has not been noticed. It's been commented upon about Muni's visit and, he had a lunch with the big white chief. It was a rare honor. Now,
Just again to say the full name in case there's anyone in the audience. So that's General Asif Munir's meeting with
General Asif Munir, the Pakistani army chief,
meeting with Trump.
Meets President Trump on, I think, 15th June? And this was 2 days after
the ceasefire.
2 days after Israel had launched the attack on Iran. Now it conveys something. And let me go back a little further. In the midst of Operation Sindoor, IMF released $1.4 billion of new commitments under Climate Resilience Fund for Pakistan, in addition to releasing $1 billion tranche under existing commitment. IMF's decision making is entirely controlled by US. So something was going on. Now, what was that thing? You have to look at the CENTCOM chief, General Kurilla's testimony to US Congress on 10th June, 3 days before the Israeli attack. And what he has said? He said there's an unprecedented opportunity to neutralize Iran. It's a strange coincidence that, it's too much of coincidence. 3 days before the attack, the general is saying it's an unprecedented. And in the same speech, he mentioned Pakistan is a valuable partner in fight against terrorism. And he gave the example, how did he justify it? He gave the example of Pakistan handing over the terrorist who's accused of involved in killing of 13 US soldiers at the time of US evacuation from Kabul in August 2021. Now the general has, unfortunately, he picked up the wrong example, because this withdrawal, humiliating withdrawal, was brought about by Pakistan's duplicity, which received more than $20 billion of assistance, according to President Trump, over 20 years period. And it gave sanctuary to Taliban.
So the point you're making
the point that I'm making is that what the example being given by general was totally irrelevant.
No, the bigger point you're making about
the bigger point I'm making is that there's something else, and that something else is Iran. And this whole testimony was just before the Israeli attack on Iran. Pakistan has a geopolitical position. It sits just east of Iran. So Pakistan was being brought on board, and some advance payment had already been made a month earlier by releasing this additional amount. So now, let me conclude by giving you in 1965, India-Pakistan war, Iran under Shah gave sanctuary to Pakistan Air Force. Now here, what Pakistan did immediately after Asim Muni's visit, Pakistan announced closure of 5 border trading posts with Iran. So Pakistan had slammed the door on Iran's face. It has basically backstabbed Iran. And that is why General Asim Munir got this welcome, and Pakistan got this advance payment in terms of $1.4 billion IMF assistance. So this is something which has a direct impact on us.
India.
America gave it. For America, the priority is the Middle East. It's not subcontinent. Indian press went about Kashmir. They are not bothered about subcontinent. Their payoff is, their priority is Middle East. But the payoff for Pakistan is against India. I think, as Mrs. Gandhi once put it, every bullet fired by Pakistan is only in one direction. Americans know this, and they have given assistance to Pakistan.
So, we're going to run out of time soon, and we haven't even begun to speak about China and Russia. As you just said, that neither did China really come to Iran's defense in a very strong way, or maybe Ambassador Srivastava said that, and neither did Russia. They are supposed to be the great axis together, but they all hedged their bets. They condemned the attack on Israel, but they've not afforded military support, they've not afforded anything else, So I come back to that question, that how do you read the global order? You said militarily, US is, completely hegemonic. But in terms of Russia and China's role, how do you see them playing the global order right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, they were called the axis of upheaval, right? So prior to this particular war between Israel and Iran, they were seen as sort of a semblance between them, a common interest that they have to push back against the Western order. North Korea providing troops to Russia was seen as part of that axis playing out, that kind of stuff. But realistically, no one was expecting either Beijing or Moscow to militarily help Iran. At least from where I was sitting, we never saw that being an eventuality. Russia is too bogged down in Ukraine to have any kind of capacities to give to Iran at this point of time, right?
And it wouldn't have helped China to humiliate America even a little bit?
Not just that. Look, I'll get to China very quickly. It's been the opposite. Iran has been providing drones to Russia for most of the war, right? So Russia has been struggling in its military-industrial complex to sort of keep up pace with the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians were or are still getting huge amounts of tranches of Western weapons and Western technology. So they have been able to make sure that Ukraine does not collapse. And that's a huge thing if you see the disparity of power between Ukraine and Russia, right? The Ukrainians have managed to sort of hold their fort with Western help. So Russia is very bogged down in that. And very quickly, something that Russia really had in the Middle East, which we haven't really touched upon, were their two bases in Syria. Now, Syria went total very quickly, right? Bashar al-Assad was propped up by the Iranians, propped up by the Russians, kept in power basically on stilts for a long period of time. And we saw that withered down very quickly. Assad had to escape to Moscow. But with his sort of collapse, the two bases, the two predominant access points to the Mediterranean the Russians have, that was also wiped out. So they really don't have a military footprint anymore in the region. So can't provide, extra military equipment at this point of time at least, and don't have a footprint. That automatically makes you sort of void.
So net, you're saying we're really going back to a completely unipolar world, which is America hegemony.
Even the only sort of power that can unravel the American hegemony is America right now, right? Because President Trump is more isolationist than anyone else. He does not believe in the idea of Pax Americana, which is sort of an American-led security order. He wants to exit from all of that. Now, if that succeeds, yes, then we are sort of going to see a much more, we are not going to see a unipolar order, but the American capacities, both political, geopolitical, and military, are so vast. Just to undo a lot what they have right now will take a lot of time and effort, even from the president's side. It's not going to happen overnight. Even if you go in the Middle East, you talk to the Arab countries, who a lot of people think are really fed up with the American presence in the region. They're really not.
So just, Kabir, this may be a naive question, but is it not disturbing to see the kind of silence when you have Tulsi Gabbard, which is his own national intelligence head, saying that Iran is not weaponizing? And that's been the assessments right through. That was the Atomic Agency's assessment as well. Though Brossi last said that they are now not complying. And Netanyahu has been saying for 30 years that they're going to make a bomb and they haven't bombed. So the fact that there's been complete violation of a sovereign nation, there's Gaza going on, which, the International Court, the UN resolutions, India, of course, abstained from Gaza, which is, inexplicable. But is it not disturbing that every single structure of international order is being subverted and violated, and there's nothing else in its place? So what is holding the world together? What is your big takeaway from this?
It is the remnants of that order which is holding things together. Because look, while the order was there, not we, but a lot of people complained that, it's an American-led system, the power is very hegemonic, it's too sort of one way. If you don't listen to the West, there is no alternatives. But now that it's unraveling, you need those political powers to rush in and fill the spaces.
But no one's doing it.
But no one has the capacity to do it right now, right? Even the Europeans were so reliant on American power that he's literally dictating their defense GDPs at this point of time, President Trump, right?
So if you were to give a pocket bio of the world right now, what is your big takeaways?
The next 5 years are going to be might and right for everyone. You have to build your might to make your way through the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. And that is how a lot of things will be determined according to how much political and military might you have. So build up.
What is yours, Ambassador? What's your big takeaway from these conflagrations?
Let me quote an European colleague of mine, and he put it very succinctly, same question. His answer was, it's the same old order, except that it is meaner. So there's no
Except that it is?
It is meaner order, much more mean.
Meaner.
meaner.
It's a meaner order, okay.
So what we have seen is that actually I have a slightly different take from Kabir. You see in the NATO summit, America and Europe have again come together. And actually the American intervention has partly assuaged this concern that America is withdrawing. It has come back. Unfortunately, it has come back in a way which does not help its own long-term interests, because its long-term challenge comes from China. And that is what successive American presidencies, including Trump, had said that they have to focus. And he had said that he doesn't want to get involved in forever wars. So this is a damage Mr. Netanyahu has done by pulling America back into the forever wars. It's not going to end. But the other side of the coin is that those who feared American isolationists, they are, saying that this is our boy. He has again come forward. And he was lapped up by Europeans. In this drama, we cannot underplay the European role. The German chancellor said that, Iranian nuclear program, it has to be put on the agenda. And he went to the extent of saying that Israel is doing our dirty work. So they actually were fully supporting Israel, fully supporting American intervention, and this has been followed by the NATO summit, where they have come together and everyone's agreed to increase the defense spending to 5% of GDP. Against what? Against then Russia doesn't pose a challenge. And NATO is not willing to fight America's war in the Far East. So there's a huge gap between their perceptions and their calculations, and this is something which directly concerns us, and I think this is what Indian policymakers are struggling to find an answer.
Well, the midnight hour is striking in Chennai, so I'm going to stop here. We could keep going over this, because I think even analyzing what China is again put up as this very terrifying sort of power, which they are, but their actions are always much more measured and watchful than what you think it will be, So it's interesting the way they played this. They've not come out in full support, like you said. They're very much watching their economic interests. So, like both of you have said, that there's a big vacuum, and is it that America is just going to come back there naturally and fill it, or all this chatter about a multipolar world seems misplaced? We'll see how it plays out. Tom Friedman just wrote a column where he said he thinks there's going to be immense internal turmoil in all these countries. Iran has been showed up as not having military power. Israel, there's a lot of disquiet inside Israel about Netanyahu's actions. And America, of course, is also being torn apart by its own sort of civil war. So he thinks that there may be a kind of reset domestically, not so much internationally. That's to be seen. I just wanted to say, when both of you said there's no morality in diplomacy and in geopolitics, but India was one of the first countries, non-Arab countries, to recognize Palestine. But now on Gaza, for India to abstain from a resolution asking for a ceasefire in Gaza, that seems an absolute, if moral is the wrong and naive word, a comprehension breakdown. What economic interest can make you not ask for a ceasefire in Gaza? I hope in some way we can bring those values back into geopolitical discussions, otherwise it seems like might is right, and that's the only thing,
Just one comment on China. China's restraint is because they want America to exhaust itself in the forever wars.
Right.
Thank you.
Do you agree with that?
I do, little bit.
Little bit.
But I agree with the fact that we shouldn't have abstained on the Gaza. I think that was no required. There was very little risk in any shape or form of doing that. What the calculation was, I'm not particularly sure. It was a very low risk, decision to make, but,
Right. And on China, you don't agree?
No, look, China is very, very quickly as the ambassador said, and you also said, they're playing it very smart. But they've had a very strong sort of historical approach to the Middle East, at least, right? They've always put their eggs in the Arab basket predominantly. They supported the Palestinian cause. Prior to this war, they hosted Hamas as well, tried to sort of, mediate and see if they can sort of bring truce. They were the conduits between Iran and Saudi Arabia normalizing. So they prefer that way. And the fact that they've always shown the US intervention in the Middle East as something that they don't want to do, and that is a problematic of why US is problematic, getting into this now would basically be against what their position has been for the past 30, 40 years. So if the US is spending much more military might in the Middle East and not in the Indo-Pacific, good for them, right?
Right. Well, I can only say that, to watch the American president in the past, of course, there have been covert actions, but for America and Israel to say that they are killing, assassinating Iranian scientists, not just military objectives, but Iranian scientists, and yet have the right to ask about India's hand in Canadian assassinations. And it just seems a world without any, accepted language of speaking. Like you said, it's only might is right. And it does seem bewildering from the outside. It seems a huge vacuum right now. I just wanted to share with everyone that one statistic that I think it's in a column you wrote, that 80% of India's digital infrastructure, access to internet, to data, runs through submarine cables, which all pass through the Middle East, So it's not just energy, basmati rice, digital assets. If you're only looking at economic aspects of our shared collective existences, we have a lot of, strategic importances of what happens in the Middle East. So thank you very much for giving us this insight. Leaves us more bewildered, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all again.
I entirely agree with your last comment. We are the same people. I have lived in the Arab world, and Indian rupee was the official tender in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia till mid-50s. And they didn't withdraw, we withdrew.